I want to talk today about anxiety, and I think if you can understand what anxiety is, where it's coming from and why it affects you, then you're much more likely to do the things that are going to help to resolve it or settle the symptoms of anxiety down. Now, anxiety is just really a response, it's our emotional response to fear. Now, there are two types of anxiety, they think. One is what's called sort of an irrational anxiety, and the other one is more of a rational anxiety. The irrational anxiety seems to originate in what is called the amygdala, which is a small part of our brain. Now, the amygdala seems to store memories or fears from prehistoric times. So things like being afraid of spiders and snakes, that comes, it would seem, genetically down from the years, from our fear years and years, many years ago, from, you know, the fear of snakes, because obviously we would die if we got bitten by a snake, and similarly with a spider. Now, here in the UK, that's very unlikely to happen, and yet we've still got this fear of snakes, lots of us. When more rationally, having a fear of something like a very fast moving car would be more rational, because that's going to cause us more harm. But many of us do not have a fear of cars that are passing us by, you know, 2 meters away on the road. So the amygdala produces this irrational type of fear. So for me, that sort of manifests itself. For instance, I do not like maggots. If I go near maggots, I have a fear response. It's not a massive one, but I do feel my heart rate rising and I feel very uncomfortable. Now, that isn't rational to me. I know that's not rational. I know that maggots are not going to do me any harm. But probably from prehistoric times, my ancestors, having maggots near them or near the food was an indicator that the food was rotten and that they shouldn't eat it. So this pre-exists in me. Now, no matter how I rationalise with my brain that this isn't a reasonable fear, it doesn't go away. And that's because they found that actually irrational fear doesn't respond very well to reasoning. You can't talk yourself out of this type of fear. What they have found that is very helpful is what is called exposure treatment. So this is actually just very gently exposing yourself on a regular basis to the actual thing that's causing you the fear. So for me, if it was maggots, I would start off with maybe having a picture nearby me of some maggots, and I would regularly look at it. And if I developed the signs of anxiety, so if my heart started racing, if I felt uncomfortable, allowing myself to sit with that feeling would be the very best way of dealing with it. When we sit with our feelings of anxiety, we are telling our brain that actually nothing bad is happening. If we, however, run away, so if I run away from that picture, that is reinforcing to my brain that actually this is a dangerous thing. The maggots are a dangerous thing, and you know, I should stay away from them. And so that anxiety response will actually get worse. So exposure therapy has been found to be one of the very best ways of dealing with this type of fear or anxiety. Now, the second type of anxiety is the more reasonable anxiety. So this originates, they think, in what's called the cortex of the brain. And this is the anxiety that we can probably deal more easily with. We can reason with it. So this rational anxiety, actually, it originates from things in our brain like our thoughts, the images we conjure up, and actually our interpretation of events. So those three things are the things that actually conjure up anxiety. So for instance, if you have a thought about something that's worrying you, and then you continue to process that thought, you start ruminating on it, your anxiety levels start to rise, and that becomes a problem. Your brain starts to realise that this thought is actually a problem, so it actually reinforces that. Similar with images, if you are imagining something catastrophic. So for me, let's give you an example. For instance, my daughter's going down the M6 motorway on a trip, and I hear that there's been a terrible crash. An anxious person might actually start imagining the images that my daughter is in a crash, she's being carried off in an ambulance, or she's dead. Your mind starts to conjure up these images. And it's thought that people who are very imaginative actually are more prone to suffer from anxiety because they're able to conjure up these images in their mind. And conjuring up these images often will, spark off this anxiety response. Now, the other thing that we do in our brains is actually our interpretation of events. So for instance, if you're giving a speech and you see a couple of people talking in the audience, you might look at them and think, oh my goodness, they're criticising me, they think I'm speaking really badly, etc. When actually they might be saying, this is a really great speech, I'm really enjoying this. So our interpretation, how we interpret things, massively affects our anxiety. So those three things are the things that actually can provoke our anxiety response. Now, what are the feelings that we get with an anxiety response? Well, you probably felt them before. So you get, you feel uncomfortable, your heart rate goes up, you might feel a bit sweaty, your hands might shake, you get a dry mouth. You might find that your digestion isn't working as well as it used to if you've got prolonged anxiety. Now, why does all this occur? This occurs because of what is called the sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is actually our protector. So the sympathetic nervous system is the thing that comes into play if you're walking across the road and a car is hurtling towards you. Your sympathetic nervous system is going to act in like milliseconds to get you out of the way. It increases adrenaline, it increases your heart rate, your breathing gets faster, you have some strength so that you can move. This happens unconsciously without us knowing. What happens with anxiety is that if you are exposing yourself or being, having continually anxious thoughts, interpretation, or visions, then this response is occurring on a lower level. So you might not feel a sudden surge of energy from the adrenaline, but underlying the anxiety is actually this response is happening. So it's raising your blood pressure a little bit, it's slowing down your digestion, it's raising your heart rate a little bit. So it's causing all these symptoms that are making you feel not quite right. And that's due to the sympathetic nervous system that's doing that. So anxiety over a long period of time obviously is not good for us because we're experiencing the response that we should have only when we're in a fearful situation. Now, what we can do is actually we can actually utilize what is called the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, this is actually the opposite of the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is there to get us back in a state of balance, to neutralize all those symptoms that have occurred due to the sympathetic nervous system. And how do we do that? So that's the main thing. We need to actually utilize this parasympathetic nervous system, and we can do that. It's not hard to do that. You have to just do it on a regular basis if you're suffering from anxiety. And I liken this a little bit to, imagine that you have a very hot room, and it's very hot here today actually. You have a very hot room and you've got an air conditioning unit in that room. And at regular times during the day, you turn the air conditioning unit on. What happens to the temperature in the room? The temperature will go down, won't it? It'll go down and it'll stay at a steady level. Now, it might start to rise up again when you turn the air conditioner off. But if you turn the air conditioner back on again, maybe, so if you turn it on at breakfast, at lunch and at evening, you reduce the temperature. Well, our anxiety is a bit like that, okay? So if you regularly practice some things that can reduce your anxiety over the day, so 3 or 4 times, just implementing simple measures, you're going to bring your anxiety down to a more of a neutral level. So the key here is actually practicing some very simple things regularly. That's really important. So what can we do? The sympathetic nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system rather, consists of nerves from our brain. So really, nerves are just messengers from our brain. And one of the very big nerves that is involved with the parasympathetic nervous system is the vagus nerve. And this runs down the centre of our body. And the other 3 nerves that are involved are nerves related to our eyes, our face and our mouth. So if we can actually activate this part of our parasympathetic nervous system, we're going to dampen down this response. And things that do that, the first one, a really good one, is breathing exercises. You've all heard of them. So hopefully you know why now you're going to be doing the breathing exercises. It's because you're activating the parasympathetic nervous system. And this vagal nerve that runs down the centre of our body, if we do diaphragmatic breathing, it's actually almost massaging your vagal nerve so that it will start to dampen down your anxiety response. So diaphragmatic breathing, really excellent thing to do. If you don't know how to do that, just go and Google it and find out. It's very simple. So that's one thing. Actually, any breathing exercise is good if you're not sure how to do that. So breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth, make sure the out breath is longer, okay? So a breathing exercise, you can do that anywhere. You can do that for a couple of minutes. That's going to be really, really useful. The next thing you can do is obviously things like relaxation exercises. So progressive muscle relaxation is really good. We often don't realise when we're anxious that we're very tense. So we might be clenching our jaw, our shoulders might be hunched, we might be clenching our feet. So actually acknowledging that and recognising that and doing something about that is a really good way to dampen down the parasympathetic nervous system. So do a progressive muscle relaxation exercise, perhaps before you go to bed, an hour before you go to bed, and get in a relaxed state. So that's another thing you can do. The next thing you can do is actually a thing called lazy eyes. So if you've ever stared into the distance and everything's sort of gone a little bit fuzzy and unfocused when we're just gazing, we've all done it, I'm sure, that's called lazy eyes, and that's activating the nerve that's involved in the parasympathetic nervous system with the eyes. So you can look forward, extend your vision peripherally and take in all around you. So you're not focusing in front, you're just gazing, and that's called lazy eyes. And that is a really, really simple way to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. You can do that sat at your desk, you can do that anywhere. Really, really simple. Another one to do is to actually yawn. So do a big yawn, and that is activating the nerve that's involved with your mouth. So another really, really simple one to do. And then of course you've got things like mindfulness. Mindfulness is amazing. Mindfulness is really telling your nervous system that you're okay with feeling a little bit anxious. So mindfulness is about sitting with your feelings. So if you're feeling particularly anxious one day, sit in solitude, go somewhere very quiet and just sit with the feelings of being anxious. Do some breathing exercises, do a couple of the exercises I've just mentioned, and actually sitting with the feelings and letting them go away, letting the anxiety feelings go away, is a message to your brain that you're not in danger and that actually nothing bad is happening to you. And that will reinforce the instruction to your brain that all is okay. And it will dampen down that anxiety response. A really good thing to do in terms of mindfulness, I've found, and I've used this with lots of people, is obviously to go outdoors for a walk. So going outdoors, getting some nice sunshine and some daylight is really good. But take your phone with you and take a picture of something beautiful like a flower. Send it to a friend and ask them to do the same back to you. Ask them to send you something that they found really lovely and interesting to you. And if you can do that a couple of times a week, that's a really good mindfulness exercise to do. So that's really good. Meditation. So mindfulness and meditation are very similar. If you can do a meditative practice every week, so even just sitting in solitude like I've just mentioned, being quiet, just sitting with yourself really is going to be really, really useful. There's evidence that shows that this really does work to help dampen down your anxiety. So they're the main things. So meditation, mindfulness, getting outside, exercise, excellent way of dealing with anxiety. We probably all know that, but if we do it, we must do it. So every day, go out for a 10, 15, 20 minute brisk walk. Exercise releases what are called endorphins. Endorphins are really part of the morphine family. So morphine, will make us feel a little bit high. Endorphins do the same thing. They give us that little bit of a high, and that's going to help dampen down your anxiety response. So exercise, getting outside, doing some mindfulness, doing some meditation, progressive muscle relaxation, doing the breathing exercises. If you can implement some of those 3 times a day, then that is going to dampen down the anxiety response, just like I mentioned about the hot room with the air conditioner. You can keep that in your mind, and keep in mind that you have to do a couple of these things. It doesn't have to be long periods of time. Just a couple of minutes a few times a day is going to really start to help you. So if you've enjoyed that video, I hope that does help. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I have another video here that you might find interesting, all about how to sleep better.